This episode is brought to you by the Pelora Group.
Welcome back to Winning Through Culture.
I'm Tim Flanagan.
And I'm Amanda Kramer.
When culture's not a priority, people aren't a priority. Having an intentional focus helps you as a leader remain impactful and relevant as you move your business forward.
Welcome to Winning Through Culture. Today, we're diving into a significant day in our collective history, Juneteenth. As Barack Obama once said, Juneteenth has never been a celebration of victory or an acceptance of the way things are. Instead, it's a celebration of progress. It's an affirmation that despite the most painful parts of our history, change is possible, and there is still so much work to do. And I personally could not agree more. As we embark on this day, it is definitely an opportunity to pause and reflect. And within our own firm's culture, which we use as content for this podcast, we encourage all of our advisors, associates, and staff members to remember, commemorate, and celebrate this day in a way that feels right for them. So we've invited Sabrina, Shannon, Billy, and Brianna to join us and share their unique perspective and insights on what Juneteenth means to them and to all of us, and how we feel business owners and leaders can support an ongoing commitment and conversation around equality in the workplace. So let's hop right in.
Welcome, everybody. So let's go back to 1865. Shannon, for those that may not be familiar, could you provide a brief overview of the history and significance of Juneteenth?
Yes, sir. So Juneteenth is the celebration of when news actually reached Galveston, Texas on June 19th of 1865. It was actually signed into law 2 years prior, but it took some time for our country to fully recognize the event. Fast forwarded to 2020, when our nation again was reaching a boiling point with some of the injustice served against African Americans. So in 2021, our president, Joe Biden, signed it into law to make June 19th a national holiday. Now, that year, the 19th actually fell on a Saturday, so it was recognized or celebrated on the 18th, which I think gives insight into the word Juneteenth. Juneteenth is actually a portmanteau of the month June and the 19th, which gives us Juneteenth.
So how does Juneteenth compare and contrast with the other significant dates in African American history, such as Martin Luther King Day?
Now, Juneteenth is a celebration of all Americans, or the freedom event of when the law was passed to make slaves free. Whereas Martin Luther King Day is a celebration of an individual who was an abolitionist against the injustice against African Americans. So again, Juneteenth is a celebration of all people, whereas Martin Luther King Day is a celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King.
So when you think about Juneteenth, I know that it's a deeply personal holiday. So for so many, and as I shared, as we kind of opened this dialogue, there are different ways in which people recognize, commemorate, and ultimately celebrate Juneteenth in their own personal lives and also in their professional lives. And we're really unpacking today how Juneteenth is continuously relevant to the full population. And so when we think about how it really impacts you as individuals, both in a professional and personal sense, maybe we could share a little bit. And Billy, I'm going to start with you about how does Juneteenth show up in your own life and what does it personally mean to you? How do you commemorate or celebrate? Are there any traditions or rituals that you participate in?
Well, for me personally, Juneteenth has been a way for reflection for myself. Honestly, I'm a millennial. And so for my generation, it's something that's actually a little bit newer than it should be as far as the recognition of it. So many folks really are just learning the history of Juneteenth. So I think once the holiday becomes more ingrained into American tradition, there'll be more experiences and memories like we do for the 4th of July. So right now, I and many others, I feel like it's really a great time to just learn more about the history of that specific day. Also, we understand that, hey, we would like to have learned about Juneteenth in school, but we haven't. So it's really a good way to catch up on the gap of education that we have gotten as far as the Declaration of the freeing the slaves, and how long it took to actually have that happen. So it's really just a reflection of something that we missed in school for many, many folks.
Yeah. And I think that is an excellent point from a standpoint of the educational opportunity that exists today. As we look at the complete population and how these particular events, the duration, how long they took to actually get enforced and recognized, and then ultimately how individuals are celebrating and commemorating those important dates in history. So, Sabrina, Brianna, Shannon, anything that you would add from a standpoint of your personal reflections or how you are approaching Juneteenth?
For me, growing up, my family we didn't have any Juneteenth traditions because, like Billy said, we didn't know about Juneteenth back in the 70s. However, as being an adult and married with children, we did used to attend the celebration that was held at Independence Park. That's near 7th Street. That celebration has now moved to the Central Avenue district, where Pap, the owner of the House of Africa, actually brought it to Charlotte. And he's responsible for bringing the celebration here and making it as big as it is, I think, in North Carolina as a whole. I will admit, I didn't know the significance or the history of Juneteenth, not in my early years. But my feelings associated with Juneteenth is it's very painful. Does that mean we have to sit in the pain from the past, or do we celebrate the progress of how far we've come? And I, myself personally, I choose to celebrate the progress where we are right now and look forward to the future.
That's excellent. Awesome. Thanks, Sabrina.
I think for our family, to commemorate Juneteenth, we go out as a group and participate with different businesses in the community and experience different functions and always try to gain a greater perspective of the plight of individuals that came before us. And so having family dialogue and then actually allowing them to relate their stories of where they're in their lives to some of the things that their parents have seen. And through the force and diligence of others, how it will constantly keep evolving is how our family has a perspective and conversations around Juneteenth.
Juneteenth is definitely playing a significant role in shaping communities across the United States. I appreciate you guys sharing your individual perspectives. And I think it is interesting, again, that it's more of a current phenomenon, if you will, for people to be aware of. But it's a historical event that did happen in 1865, and it was of great significance. As you guys see in your own communities where you live and belong and serve, how are you seeing it shape the communities you are living in and serving?
Bree, maybe let's start with you. Anything from a community standpoint, especially in your professional capacity, you are serving clients. And then also from a personal standpoint, you are part of a greater community. So any thoughts there?
Here at work, Juneteenth allows us a safe space to have open conversation pertaining to race and encourages dialogue around the ongoing inequalities that our social climate is currently subject to.
So, Billy, how have you seen this shaping the communities you live in and serve?
Well, for me, I think there is a big opportunity within the community to have more representation of Juneteenth. Right now, from what I see, most folks are really happy about the holiday. It's used as a time to come together and share stories. But for me, I look forward to the future where the more and more we make it a tradition to really celebrate it. And also, it really helps with employers that help on the work side. But I feel, in my personal opinion, once there's more and more Juneteenths, there will be more and more traditions within the communities, whether it's the Triad area or Charlotte. But right now, I think it's really something that's so new that those will still be forming over time. Such as July the 4th, when it was new, I imagine those traditions had to form as well. So
the fireworks have gotten bigger and bigger over the years. As far as one of the points that you made, you talked about the organization. So just in general, I know we use our daily experiences and our professional life to really bring relevant content to this particular podcast. However, there are several organizations, small, big, medium sized. Shannon, you work with a ton of business owners. What have you seen in working with those particular organizations about how they're supporting Juneteenth and more specifically the fight for equality and justice. Have you seen any resources or any events or anything that they're doing that you think specific business owners could potentially institute to help continue the conversation?
Yes. For instance, some of the big box retailers, as you can see now, there's a more proliferation of HBCU merchandise in those respective companies, and they're trying to market and help build the momentum behind Juneteenth and help to celebrate it. And from a smaller business standpoint, I've seen numerous businesses that I'm involved with, and also that I get advice and opinions behind, implement diversity and equity and inclusion in an effort to make sure they capture more marketplace and have a different perspective of what their customers are saying about their business. And so I see Juneteenth as a learning ability for a lot of companies to evolve and figure out how to serve the public better. And so I'm excited about it.
That's awesome. Sabrina, as far as how you have experienced the professional recognition of holidays such as Juneteenth, Black History Month as a whole, what are your feelings about ways that employees can engage with their employers to make sure that those are equally represented across the entire population of company holidays, let's call it, or celebration opportunities? Is there anything that resonates with you?
Forums that will allow people to ask questions and to ask the questions without being fearful of offending anyone, and just to make sure that we recognize what our why is when we're doing things centered around Juneteenth and other holidays.
Yeah, but for me, I'll piggyback on that question. So what I think employers could do, I think for one is we all understand that it's fairly new to even the African American populations for different organizations. But I think the same thing that the Pullover Group has done, which is take on that kind of that advisory role and asking questions. What does Juneteenth mean to you? And really get the pulse for their employees, because different employees for different organizations may have a different feeling of what Juneteenth means to them. But that could be where you start at, is really to ask your African American employees who are working in your organization, what does it mean to them? And get that brainstorm going on ideas to move forward each year of how they celebrate it. So,
yeah. And Sabrina, you and I have had a lot of dialogue and I shared this in the opening comments, right? That it is a very personal experience. And so not everyone approaches Juneteenth as the holiday that we're talking about right now in the same form or fashion, right? So the education component, I think, is crucial to make sure that you are having that ability to kind of live in fact a little bit for those that might be less educated around the particular topic or holiday. And then moving into the action component, you shared, forums, making sure that you're having that advisory conversation. So you were asking for how the population would want to approach it, right? There's not going to be one solution that's going to fit everyone, but I think offering it in a more consumable fashion is really important. So you mentioned having those little known facts or lesser known facts that you can build upon, sharing what's going on in the community where people can self-educate. One of the things that I found really impactful as we were progressing through COVID and having more dialogues around race and religion and all those different topics was instituting a third-party resource that was self-education focused for anyone to go and have access to materials, right? And then have conversations based on those self-study materials that they had access to. So we've done podcasts in the past on one of the platforms that we have used specifically in our organization. So Right Now Media at Work, because there is a lot of content that is education focused. There are different types of TED Talks or self-study materials where you can actually work through and have a guidebook. I do think that's really important as a business owner, an entrepreneur, whether you have a team of 1, 3, 20, 300, really providing that opportunity for self-education and then providing that conversation opportunity as well is really, really important.
Yeah, so from an employer standpoint, using the significance of Juneteenth to connect with their employees to be able to gauge their perspective and how they see life. And it will give insight truly into how that employee can be more productive for the company and also how the employer can be more productive to the employee. and taking on numerous holidays, such as Cinco de Mayo, to understand from a Latin perspective their sense and why they celebrate said day. And so these milestones throughout the year will be a chance for the employer and the employee to connect better and to foster a more vibrant culture.
That's awesome. I love how you kind of pinpointed and said the milestones throughout the year. So I know this one we're particularly talking about Juneteenth, but there are so many in our history. And I like to celebrate all things that make us human, right? So it is not, and I just kind of want to hop in here because I recently saw a Juneteenth activist, again, doing self-education because there's still so much for me to learn. But Opal Lee said, it's not a Black thing. It's not a white thing. It's an American thing. It's a unifier. It's an opportunity for us to come together, Shannon, as you said, around that connectivity, that reflection. And we're all in a different stage of learning as it comes to different holidays that we celebrate, commemorate, or recognize. And I think just being open and vulnerable about that, whether that's in your personal relationships or in your professional one, is essential to moving the conversation forward. Just because it's uncomfortable, honestly, that's really where progress gets made, is when we do become uncomfortable. I hear that in Orange Theory, literally every time I go, they're right. Like growth comes from being uncomfortable. And so I think it's important that growth from a standpoint of our understanding and our ability to connect better as humans comes from having those more difficult conversations or opening that dialogue. And Sabrina, you're so great about doing that with me, which I really appreciate. So much so that we've instituted as an organization, some opportunities to come together and talk about race relations, some opportunities to come together and talk about how we can empower certain populations in our professional life. And I'm just really grateful for all that y'all have shared with us. And I think to that point, Sabrina, talking about allyship and then solidarity playing and honoring in Juneteenth and kind of advancing that conversation. Is there anything that you would share with the listeners of this about how allyship could really support moving it forward?
Sure. I would say allyship can encourage authentic participation, which can lead to educating those that do not fully understand the purpose behind the acknowledgement of Juneteenth. And once the purpose is understood, at that point, we can begin fostering diversity and inclusion. My prayer is that we can all get to a place where we can have soft conversations without the fear of offending anybody for questions that you may ask, questions that you may have, because at the end of the day, you're asking the questions because you don't know. For me, solidarity role is a little bit more simpler. Everyone does not have the same viewpoint when it comes to Juneteenth. There is a lot of pain now, and there was a lot of pain then associated with Juneteenth. Some people will not even acknowledge the holiday, period. And that's okay because that's them and where they are. However, standing in solidarity is what makes us powerful as an entire body because we're working together for the same cause, the same reason, the same why. And that why is to ensure equality and freedom is protected at all times. That's just my take.
Well said. That was awesome. Thank you.
Very well said, Sabrina.
Thank you.
I like the way you said that. As we've talked about over the last few years in our organization, leadership, big part of it is helping people be aware and have the uncomfortable conversations to develop not only relationship, but awareness. We live in such a polarized society right now that those conversations, as Bree said, safe space to have a difficult conversation, I think is incredibly important on the topic of race. And it's something that may happen in a church, but in a business setting, it's something people seem to want to avoid, but everybody shows up as their authentic self at work. And what a better opportunity than in a business setting to step into these conversations and build the relationships and build the understanding, the knowledge, and the awareness. So thank you for your comments.
You're welcome. And I try to create a space for especially people that I talk to on a regular basis where they can come in and ask me questions. Because if there's a question that I want to know, I'm going to ask because that's how you learn.
I think just taking a general interest in people will move you to a greater clarity on how to be a resource for them and them to be a resource to you. And I wouldn't expect any one person to know the totality of their culture. Just ask questions to gain perspective and understanding.
Shannon, I have to share just a little bit of a personal story for you and I, because we have worked together for more than 10 years. And it has been a really cool relationship to develop. But I will say we had the opportunity to spend a significant portion of time in a car together. And that was a few years back. And that is where I feel like our relationship really was able to blossom. And it was simply just us learning about each other, learning about our families, and having a shared experience. And I share that because I do feel like that is one of the foundational items that would help in, again, being solidarity, uniting in a particular way, but really just uniting as people. And I was really grateful for that time together. Clearly, we had known each other up until that point, but I feel like I know you so much better now, right? Now, granted, we were confined to a car for a little bit, but I think that providing those shared experience opportunities as a organization or as an employer, small business owner, entrepreneur, for those that are part of your community, whether you see that as your employees, you might have contractors, vendors, whatever that looks like, is really important. And it doesn't have to be a driving experience. It could certainly be something else. But are there any shared experiences that anyone partaking in this dialogue today that's been a part of that you feel like really elevated the opportunity for you to connect with, whether it was somebody in a particular population or if it was somebody that was just in your community? Anything that you've participated in that you feel like, hey, that was a really great experience, and it's something that individuals, entrepreneurs, business owners could potentially onboard to help have those dialogues, make it a little bit more comfortable to have that uncomfortable conversation or getting to know somebody in a more intimate way?
I had a conversation with Steve Krasnopol. I've known Steve since I started working here, and our relationship started out extremely rocky because I was in my 30s and I had a hothead, and Steve was a little younger as well. But once Race Relations Group was founded, we agreed that we would have lunch together the next time he came here. He was probably somebody I probably would never have had lunch with, but we made the commitment to do it, and we did it. And I learned so much about his family, growing up in New York, him growing up as Jewish. I didn't know the background on the Jewish community, and he educated me a lot on that, and I did him as well within my community. And that was a wonderful thing. I hope that Steve and I do it again. And other people that I may not come in contact with, like on a regular basis, like my everyday people that I see here, those are people that I know that I can go to and talk to about anything. It's the ones that I don't know is the ones that I would like to connect with.
Go ahead, Shannon.
I think the privilege of me being an advisor has garnered me the opportunity to see people in a different light. It's a widely known perception that African Americans distrust the police, right? But when you break down that barrier and actually see what a person truly is, you can foster a relationship that will last for eons.
Bree, have you had any personal experiences similar to what Sabrina and Shannon have shared?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize the importance of making sure that we're not being misinformed on the history. I feel like we live in a culture right now where there are certain parties that are trying to water down a history that is already there. These are things that have happened, and it's important that we keep that history alive so that we're not repeating it in the future. And we see that happen all the time in our communities. So I will say on my end, as a millennial, I appreciate that we have social media and we have groups at work that we can come together. You know, here at the Pelora group, we have the Power group, and we come together and we can commemorate the history and also just have open dialogue and conversation. And then that naturally trickles into our conversations around the office. And I think that even working alongside more seasoned advisors, I'm learning along with them some facts about Black history and Juneteenth. And it just goes to show how much work still needs to be done, but how far we've come so far.
Well, and you mentioned the power group, and that is something that is beyond a race relations study group. That is something that is beyond some of the more employer focused opportunities for gathering that I've heard about. So maybe, Billy, you want to expand a little bit on what Bree was saying about the power group and the uniqueness that that group has brought to our particular organization? But I do think it's something that others could consider instituting or supporting from a standpoint. We talked a little bit earlier about unity, allyship, and solidarity. So, Billy, maybe hop into it.
Sure. Well, for me, I think that the Power Group has been a great platform for our organization to have African American staff members and advisors come together. The thing that stands out to me mostly about the Power Group is that you don't really find this really anywhere. So I think from an organizational standpoint, it's really awesome to just have that from a diversity standpoint and understanding each other. But for me, for this industry, well, I feel like it's so much more important for financial services is because, as we know, statistically, most African Americans probably have a harder chance of surviving in this industry than their counterparts do, just due to their natural networks, their natural backgrounds and upbringings. So I feel like to have these types of groups with different financial service institutions that we are, where advisors can come together and we have the goal to try to keep people thriving in this industry. That's a really big thing when you're looking at the survival rate for any advisor.
And the Power Group, it stands for Protecting Our Wealth, Estate, and Resources. And a little bit of background on the Power Group. It was birthed because Tim Flanagan and I had a conversation, not saying that I'm the reason why, but we had a conversation during the George Floyd incident. It was when we were in lockdown. I was at home and I was having a hard time getting past what I had just seen on TV. I was reporting to Tim then, and Tim had a conversation, and Tim called me, and I was able to just cry and share my fears, my frustrations, and everything with Tim. And Tim was like, what can we do? And he went back to the senior leadership team, and they got together, and that's where the Power Group was birthed, as well as the Race Relations Group, built up with everybody. Power Group is built up with the African American, like Brianna said, associates and staff members here. And that's why it's very, very, very near and dear to my heart because of the way it was birthed. I don't take it lightly. And I try my best this year not to take it personal when people don't share the same passion that I share for the Power Group.
Yeah, Sabrina, that was that conversation obviously was the catalyst for everything you just shared. And I think you hit on something that I was speaking to earlier, which is George Floyd, the murder happened, everything that happened after that. As a business, we had employees that were having a range of emotions, mostly the emotions you shared. And it was, I think, imperative to not try and run away from that or hope it went away or let everybody deal with that outside of work, but to really bring everybody together for a conversation, which did lead to the Race Relations Study Group, which led to your great story about sitting down with somebody who did not look like you and did not come up like you, and both of you learning about each other. And I think it's something that Shannon said, that the core of all this is we're all human beings. Color of our skin may be different. Our experiences in life may be different. So this whole idea of awareness and bringing up the level of awareness and empathy ultimately among all parties of the organization is really what this is about. And Juneteenth gives us another opportunity to have a conversation, as y'all said, relative to, some very powerful experiences in our past that, as Bree said, you can't rewrite history. You can, maybe Billy, your point, you might not talk about it, but you can't rewrite it. It's real. And I think it's good that everyone is becoming more aware of the history, having the dialogue in a healthy way, and hopefully in a way that unifies people, not divides them. So, as we conclude our podcast today, are there any other thoughts or messages you want to leave the listeners, whether it's related to Juneteenth or not, just about, our collective history and how we can at least use the opportunity of Juneteenth to be an inclusive holiday now and in the future? So, Sabrina, I'll start with you.
Yeah, we can ensure that we always fight to educate and engage and empower here at the Pelura Group. And again, like I said, just provide as many resources as we can to those that we come in contact with on a daily basis, our clients and everyone else. And also venturing out and partnering with other companies and community leaders that share the same passion that we do here.
All right. Bree?
For me, I think it's all about continuing with the education and being consistent. I want to piggyback with what Sabrina said. It's the power group. We're still here, but it's about being intentional. We're intentional every day in our practices. Let's also be intentional within our communities as well. Not just when we're leaving the office, but while we're here. Because most of our days, we are in our business, right? Our business is a huge part of our life. So just coming together, being intentional and consistent with just what it is that we're committed on achieving.
All right. Billy?
Well, for me, I just want to really give a huge shout out again to the Pelura Group as a whole. Just for one, the platform for the Power Group, of course, for the celebration of Juneteenth as well. Like I said, from my experience, you don't really find this platform too often in many organizations, especially this type of organization. And for me personally, when I actually describe this to friends in general of what we do, it's like they can't believe it. It's so unique. It's so authentic. Folks want to work here, but I say, hey, you have to get licensed first. You can't just join the Power Group just to have a job. But it is really a thing that people like to hear about. Hopefully other organizations can copy this blueprint going forward. But for me, I just wanted to give a huge kudos to the organization for the ongoing support for it.
Well, thank you. Shannon?
Use Juneteenth as a time for everyone to learn history. But when you hear that, break it down when I use the word history, to learn his story or her story.
Mm-hmm.
And when you reflect upon that, it will be enduring and enlightening for both parties. And so that's my comment with Juneteenth.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the Pelura Group for doing this.
Absolutely. So one of the things I know a lot of listeners typically ask us for are there any books or movies or podcasts, other podcasts that any of our guests are reading or listening to that might help continue the conversation or help continue the education around the topic that we have on the podcast today? So before I formally close us out, is there anything top of mind, a book, a podcast, a movie that you would recommend as people are continuing to work on self-education, no matter their race?
Well, for me, growing up as an African-American child, I was always, I think we all know this famous movie that we all have seen that I think it's a good movie for anyone to watch when it comes to this topic. But it's called Roots, which is a great novel by Alex Haley back in the 70s, where he told his family's story from Africa leading up all the way into like the 1940s or below or so. There's different chapters of the docuseries Roots, and it gives you a lot of just insight into the times. And it's really cool to see a person who has traced his own roots that far into Africa. Another resource that I actually have just used recently that I'm going to recommend will be Ancestry. Ancestry or any other type of reputable DNA service kit to really trace where you come from as a person. I have my own little story that I'm working through to find out more information for myself. But for any person who is looking to find out just where they come from and just to really find out more about themselves, whether you're Black or white or any other race, I'll recommend to, at some point, to take an Ancestry or some other type of service to find out more.
That's awesome. Thanks, Billy. Anybody else have any resources that they would want to share or suggest?
It's a really good movie on Netflix, The 13th Amendment. After watching it, you will have a different perspective overall. And then all of us, I think, have extremely busy lives. So use AI on your drive home to get questions about Juneteenth, about Black History Month, anything that you want to gather greater information in regards to.
And also have lunch with someone. They can tell you that story better than anybody else.
I love it, Sabrina. That's great. Wonderful. Well, Tim and I just want to extend our sincerest thanks to all of you for participating and sharing insightful contributions, your own personal stories and experiences as part of this conversation. As we recognize and commemorate Juneteenth, let us all remember the struggles and triumphs that those that have come before us. And let us all continue to work together as a human race to ensure that freedom and equality are truly universal. So thanks for joining us on another episode of Winning Through Culture. We hope to see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Winning Through Culture.
Until next time, stay intentional, be impactful.
Because your culture matters.